Hello everyone! In today's video I continue the 1974 AMC Gremlin drag build by assembling the custom 3D printed chassis. If you're new to this project, check out the playlist below in the description. I've previously made a video introducing this project, and I made a video showing the design process of the chassis. I'm now ready to assemble the chassis, making sure everything fits together and functions as it should. I've posted the STL files for this chassis on Patreon for anyone who's interested. The link is below in the description. As you can see, I have all the parts that I'll be using printed. There were just a few parts I wanted to do a little post-print finishing work on. The rear frame piece was a little rough, so I took a little time to sand the bottom side and remove some imperfections before securing it to the main chassis piece using 4 1.6x4 screws. There was some minor layer separation in a few spots, which I fixed using super glue. While waiting for that to dry, I moved on to doing some work on the wheels and tires. I sanded the wheels to help remove any imperfections. I then glued the inner wheel piece to the outer wheel piece. I also glued each half of the tire together. I like to print the wheels and tires in separate pieces to make them easier to print. They're already looking pretty cool, but next I wanted to sand the tires as well. I'll soon be spraying Plasti Dip onto the tires to give them more grip. As I've shown before, I applied Plasti Dip to the tires. I also applied primer to help smooth the surface of the wheels. I continued with painting by spraying the rear axle and suspension links silver, painting the wheels chrome, and painting the chassis flat black. Admittedly not my best paint work, with the wheels not prepped as well as I could have and some runs on the chassis, but it won't be an issue. It's easy enough to swap out the wheels at a future time, but for now they'll look nice. Next I assembled the axle. As you might be aware, this axle is just a narrowed MA10, and therefore the assembly process is the same for this axle as any other MA10, except for this car is using a ladder bar with panhard rear suspension. I used two 1x4mm screws to secure the ladder bars to the axle, and a 1x8mm screw to secure the ladder bars to the chassis. Here's a look at the completed axle assembly. It's narrow enough that I'll be able to fit the large rear tires under the body. It'll be a tight fit, and I'll need to do just a bit of trimming around the wheel arches, but it should work great. Since there's quite a bit of excess axle shaft sticking out, I marked where I wanted to cut and then carefully removed these sections. I continued by securing the ladder bars and panhard bar to the chassis. Already I'm loving how this car is looking. With the rear end sorted out, I focused on assembling the front suspension. The process is the same as what I showcased previously when I built the Shelby GT500. There's a bit too much toe in due to me making the center link a little too short, but that won't be a problem as you'll see soon. I discovered that the width of the front suspension is just a tiny bit too wide, so I printed a set of narrower upper and lower mounts to use instead. I also needed to trim a little material off of the front corners of the chassis where they get in the way of the center link, so I could ensure that I would get the maximum steering angle. This front suspension assembly was just a tad bit too wide, so I swapped in the new parts that I just printed to make the front narrower. Just like with the rear axle shaft, I cut the front axle shaft so there isn't too much excess. To prevent all of the nuts from coming loose, I used Loctite. Next, I removed the rear tires for easier access and installed the rear springs. I might change these springs at some point further on in the build process, but for now they'll work. After that, I wanted to cut the drive shaft to the length I needed and install the motor. I measured how long I needed the drive shaft to be and then adjusted the length until it fit. The rear axle is sitting lower than it will once the car has weight, which is why the rear driveshaft socket is at an odd angle. It's a similar process to install the steering servo and steering shaft. I needed to cut the 1.5mm rod to the correct length. Finally, I installed the rear tub pieces. I probably will end up painting these at some point. Of course, with the chassis now assembled, I couldn't resist doing a quick mock-up, and I'm really liking how the car is turning out. Here it looks like the chassis might be just a few millimeters too long, however I think once I modify the rear wheel arches and I'm able to move the body slightly forward, the chassis will be a great fit. One thing that I didn't talk about earlier that I thought I'd mention now is that I'm using a N20 motor for this car, as you can see. I thought I'd start with a more sensible motor in the beginning, but later I plan on swapping in something with more power to really push the car to its limits, and maybe see if I can make it do wheelies. I'm not sure how much the drivetrain will handle, so I thought I'd start sensible and experiment with more powerful motors later on. I'm very excited to continue this project, and I hope you are as well. In the next video, I'll be working on the body. As always, you can get early access to videos and other special perks by becoming a member on Patreon using the link below, or becoming a channel member here on YouTube by clicking the join button below this video. That's all for today's video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.